Thank you for your patience. So my name is Cindy Mazer, and I'm the director for ADR at FEMA. I'm also the chair of the Interagency ADR Working Group, Workplace Conflict Management Section. So on behalf of those two organizations, I'd like to welcome you here. Thank you for being here. It is chilly out, and we appreciate people who've come across the mall or whatever. So let's talk about, for starters, let's talk about thanking people. I want to thank Pam Pontillo and Kathy Barkey, who's at the computer, and Victor Voloshin, and the two people who let you in upstairs, Pam, Charmaine Oliphant, and who's the other?
Calethea Clements.
Yeah, so all those people are volunteering their time, and we really appreciate all their efforts because this is a free event, and we really appreciate people just volunteering their efforts to make it happen. So thank you. Let's have a hand. And second, I want to tell you about our next event that's going on Thursday, April 10th. That's by Claudine Schweber, who has a PhD in program management from the University of Maryland. And her topic is workplace disruptions, reorganizations, change fatigue, and all kinds of disorienting activities in the federal agency. Can ADR support resilience? So she's done a lot of research on how we can maintain a sense of power and integrity in the midst of being a federal worker. So that's April 10th. Today, we're talking about respectful confrontation. Our speaker is Joe Weston, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about him before I turn the program over to him. Joe is an international workshop facilitator, author, consultant, personal life coach, social activist, and advocate for peace. He's written a book called Mastering Respectful Confrontation, which is selling internationally. He was born and educated in New York. He lived in Amsterdam for 17 years, now lives in DC, and he is committed to helping others embody their true power, overcome and prevent conflict, and enhance their journey towards personal fulfillment and freedom. He's worked for NSA, the World Bank, the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, veterans organizations, and he has worked for the Liberation Prison Project. He brings a wealth of knowledge and experience for us today, and I turn the program over to him now. So thank you, Joe.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Victor. I have to say I'm very grateful. Oh, that feels better. Thank you. I want to thank Mohammed for helping out with the technical things. I'm very grateful to be here. I'm very passionate about the work I do. I'm very passionate about the idea of what it is that we can do, each one of us, to deepen our connection with others, particularly those we don't know, for the purpose of overcoming a lot of strife in the world, hunger, crime, war. And so to come and be asked to speak at a discussion for alternative dispute resolution is very exciting. So thank you for having me here. Thank you for all coming. I just want to start with a couple of things. This is an odd way for me to do this. Rather be sitting down there with you, and I might do that at some point, get down on the floor and talk with you. I also have people on the phone, so welcome people on the phone. Glad that you're here. Hope you're enjoying a cup of coffee or a cup of tea while you listen. And just so that you all know, if you're going to follow the PowerPoint, particularly if you're on the phone, I did shuffle it a little bit, so this is a great opportunity for us to practice flexibility, which we will discover is an important part of respectful confrontation and overcoming conflicts. So it's a great opportunity for all of us to practice. And I promise to do my best to take care of your needs in terms of understanding where we are in the PowerPoint and how that's going. So I always start by, there's a couple of things I'd like to say to start. One of them is that respectful confrontation is a practice and a method that I developed over many years, and I'll tell you more about the history of that, that has helped me and has helped others to stand in their power, speak their truth, get their needs met, and do that in a way where they don't get harmed and other people don't get harmed. And that's the essence of the work, and that came from a lot of research that I was doing just personally. And what I often hear when so on some level, I would say it's probably one of the most effective ways to avoid and overcome conflict. There are a lot of trainings out there, brilliant trainings that deal with conflict resolution, like nonviolent communication, crucial conversations, masterful conversations, many on dispute resolution. And those are all very powerful tools. And what I have found is that people have often asked me, how is yours different from theirs? And I say there are a lot of similarities, and if you can study those, please do, because they really work. But I find that the biggest difference is that in those trainings, you learn the skills of how to speak peace. You learn the skills of the right words, of what to say. And particularly when someone else is creating conflict, or if there's a conflict outside of yourself, it's first of all, it's learning the right words to overcome that. And I've just found that, and I would see in many of the years of trainings that I did, that there were many people who had all the right words, but as soon as they got into a situation that was reactive, as soon as they got into a situation where either they were shaking and trembling, or that the other person started getting aggressive or bullying, all the words go out the window. Do you recognize that? So that's really, so the work that I'm doing it's an embodied process. It's based on martial arts, it's based on a lot of physical practices, so that's not just getting information or an intellectual experience, it's understanding the emotional component in this as well as the physical component, and learning to develop skills to really listen into your own body and energetic awareness to stay grounded and focused in that situation. And those situations are always going to be difficult. They're always going to be challenging. They're always going to be uncomfortable. So it's not a question of wanting to get rid of the uncomfortable. It's a question of how do you get more skillful and more at home in the uncomfortable. So that's just a general thing about how I believe that my work on some level is an effective way to avoid conflict. And that's what we're going to look at today. Is oftentimes I'm brought into companies to deal with disputes, to deal with mediation. So what I'm brought in to do is to save companies money, in a sense, as well as the harmony in the work culture, with the idea that, well, what happens if the employees had skills to deal with issues as they arose, not when they were really heavy and not when it was already very charged, but when something just arose, some behavior that arose that triggered you or challenged you or caused miscommunication, and that you felt confident to speak it at that moment. So it's resolved and you move on. And what we find, either in a work situation or in a relationship, suddenly it's like, wow, what happened? We've been together for 25 years. What happened? How did that person blow up all of a sudden? Well, usually it was a number of small things that just kept building, that started building resentment and disengagement, disempowerment. And so the work is about how do you deal with it at that moment so it doesn't escalate to a larger conflict. Does that sound interesting, or does that resonate? Yeah, so I'm going to take a little bit of water, take care of my needs at this moment. I think it's interesting to sit here and to have you sit there. How many of you are old enough to remember dial-up internet? Well, imagine if you had to now use your computer on a dial-up network. What would that do to you? Well, for me, because a lot of the work I do is like, what is the question that I asked that really motivated this work I've been asking for a long time is, why is it, even though we know better, even though we have arguments and fights why is it even though we know better, we're an intelligent species, we have the internet, we have a lot of information, technologically we advance. Why is it even though we know better as people, we still have arguments and fights? War, crime, hunger, misunderstandings. Oh, someone wants to give an answer. I love that.
I was thinking miscommunication.
Miscommunication. Yeah, that's a big part of it. There's so much money. It's been proven. There's billions and billions of dollars is wasted in the business sector on miscommunication. So imagine just with different communication skills how much you could actually save, That's really the essence of what propelled me to develop this work. Why is it even though we know better, we still have arguments and fights? Now, most people would just say, well, that's just the way we are. But I was never really satisfied with that answer. And I'll tell you more about how precocious I was as a kid and drove my parents crazy and my teachers and everyone around me. But I felt that it was important to pursue that, to keep questioning. So we're going to look at what is it that propels us to, even though we know better, to have arguments and fights. And part of that is looking at some unexamined assumptions that we have about ourselves and our behavior and paradigms that I would like us to just look at. So what I just wanted to say was, it's a funny, one of the paradigms that I think is shifting is this idea of, for me to sit here up on the stage and for you to sit there, and the way that's an old paradigm to me. It's very much, I'm the boss, and you're just sitting there listening, and you're, in a sense, passive in a certain way, and I'm doing all the work. You're stuck listening to me for an hour and a half, when I'm sure you have interesting to share as well. Whereas if we were to sit in a circular model, then that would open up, that would make us on some levels more vulnerable and also more powerful. And that's really what this work is about, that people get a feeling like, there is a leader in an organization, but that everyone's voice can be heard. So please bear with me. This is the challenge of being in this dial-up situation with you, and we'll see how we go with that. My story is I grew up in New York City. Anybody here from New York City? Yeah. Queens? Anyone here from Queens? Okay. Flushing. Yeah. And as a boy, it was expected that I would fight. And I did. I fought all the time. It was just what it was. And it was a ridiculous game. And I didn't see it then, because that's what we did. I was best friends with Ralphie and Richie, but one week I was best friends with Ralphie and we hated Richie and we beat on Richie. And then the next week I was best friends with Richie and we beat up on Ralphie. And then we were always beating up on the kids in the next block. And that was our rhythm. And my dad also came from New York City, and he came from he was an amateur boxer and was also a fighter and fought all the time. And it was his way of surviving in his world was to get into hang out with sometimes the wrong crowd. And he spent some time in prison when I was around 12 years old. And so I come from that world where that was just expected. And I just saw how silly it was. This whole, why is it even though we know better? Why aren't we doing something more productive? Why are we fighting? So I stopped fighting. Now that didn't go over well with Richie and Ralphie. And that certainly didn't go over well with my dad. And he tried his best to teach me, I got to teach my boy how to fight. Got to teach him how to fight. And so that went on, and then I ended up, I studied theater. And I always say that I'm very grateful that I did, because I say that acting is the science of human behavior. If I learned anywhere what human behavior is, it was learning the craft of acting, which has helped me in the work I'm doing as a consultant and a coach, and this work around nonviolence and conflict resolution, is understanding our behaviors. And then I lived in the Netherlands for 18 years. I happened to end up there and had the most amazing opportunity to work with all kinds of people from all areas, from artists to CEOs around the world, and to learn different cultures and a different language. And it was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. And what I discovered in that, which was so powerful for me, and what it is that one of the things I'd like to share in this work I do, is that what I discovered is that everyone had an interesting story to tell. And everybody's interesting story, even if I didn't know them, even if they were different, even if they frightened me, they had an interesting story to tell. And in listening to that story, I always had something to learn. So I am much richer because I took the time, I had the curiosity to listen to other people's stories, particularly strangers. And in this talk I'm going to do, there's a lot of little things I'm going to say that I think are nuggets in terms of ways of how can you walk through life more in your power, speak your truth, get your needs met in a way where you don't get harmed and other people don't get harmed, and in a way where you can avoid conflict more. So I'll share them with you as we go along. This is one of them. What I realized is that with everybody I came across, no matter if they spoke a different language, what their political views were, their background, the socioeconomic class, I could always find common ground. Because what I discovered is that even though we were different, and some of us really volatilely different on some level, I discovered that every person on some level wants to be happy, wants to be free from suffering, and wants to be heard or understood. And you could almost trace that last one, that a lot of conflicts, a lot of war, a lot of conflicts come from this feeling of, this powerless feeling, I'm not being heard or understood. I'm not being valued. I'm not being seen. So I offer that as a way of, with anybody you come in contact with, you can be different, you can have different viewpoints, and you can explore this idea of we can always find some kind of common ground. So one of the things that helps me in giving my talk, and to know that I feel like on some level it's an organic process of me giving and you receiving, is every once in a while I'll ask you to take a nice, full, deep breath. So would you do that with me? And maybe you didn't know it, but we're actually going to do some exercises. So if you want to run now. Because like as I said, this work is not just an intellectual experience, it's a physical, embodied experience, and to get the wisdom of that in your body. So even people at home, you could be following us as well. So whenever I'm leading a group, now I'm going to go to the next PowerPoint slide. Oh, these are the goals of what we're going to explore. So I'm on the PowerPoint that says goals. To learn about empowered collaborative engagement, reframe views on confrontation, assertiveness, and true power, and achieve greater self-confidence, personal freedom, fulfillment, and peaceful interactions with others. That's really the essence of the work I do. And I do this in corporations, I do this as consulting, I do this as self-empowerment workshops, I do this as motivational speaking, and I do this also in terms of helping people who are suffering from trauma, like veterans, like wounded warriors, and various other people. This is really the essence of it, which we'll explore. And I always start a group with this concept. I just put on the slide that says welcome. And it may sound obvious, but there's some wisdom in it. You are all welcome. No matter what your political views are, whatever your religious views, who you choose to love, what your favorite flavor of ice cream is, you are all welcome. And that's an important concept. It's more than just saying you are welcome. There's a teaching in that. And that's what respectful confrontation is really about, is this idea of, is it possible to actually collaborate with people who are different? You don't have to love them. You don't have to marry them. You don't have to go out drinking with them. You don't even have to agree with them. But can you show some level of common ground or respect, or to say, okay, all our views can be heard? And but I'm hearing that a lot in the peace world, that what they're saying, which is, I appreciate, is this idea of what we really need right now to solve a lot of our economic problems, our political problems, is to be able to find a way to skillfully sit down with those we don't agree with. And to have the conversations, to really hear it. And that's why it's called respectful confrontation. Because I've seen over and over again with this work, with myself and with many others, that a lot of people will come in and say, Joe, this all sounds great, but with my mother, that'll never work. Or with my boss, that'll never work. And what I say is that after going through this process, that perhaps in the past it hasn't worked. But what I find that with respectful confrontation, that, and I'll talk more and tell you why I think that is, that where there were no solutions, suddenly new solutions emerge that shock you and the other person, that comes from the collaboration of coming up, of you being able to express truly what your feelings are and your needs are, and having the courage to speak your needs and feelings and to hear that of another. There's a quote more towards the end of the slides where Winston Churchill says, it takes courage to sit down and speak your truth. It takes more courage to sit down and hear the truth of another. And that's really what this is about, is to have the respect and the openness and the understanding to do that. So I always start with, you are all welcome, whoever you are and what you bring to this. And all of you is welcome. And that's also an important element in this work. You are all welcome. As I said, it's in the differences that we can find new solutions. So I say, let's encourage that, the diversity. And at the same time, all of you is welcome. You are far more richer and complex than you may think you are, or you may think that your colleagues are. And so when I say all of you is welcome, even here as you're sitting here, you're here, we're engaging on an intellectual level, we're talking ideas. However, you're having feelings, you're having emotions. There are things happening in your body, chemical reactions. If there's any biologists here, you know what I'm saying. And those things play a part in this. And that is really what we're going to explore, is why is it, even though we know better, if it was just from an intellectual point of view, we probably wouldn't have as many arguments and fights. It's all the other things that we don't really acknowledge at any given moment that actually gets in the way, what I would call the reactive behavior, the hidden things. And we're going to explore how the more we can realize what's happening at any given moment in the present, the more we can not let that rule us and distract us, but actually make use of it to deepen relationship and deepen collaboration. So all of you are welcome, and all of you is welcome. How does that sound? Okay, let's take a breath. And when I'm doing dispute resolution, or if we are dealing with more of a 2-day workshop, which I do this as a 1-day training or a 2-day workshop, that really becomes pertinent to be able to know that there's room for your feelings, to express that, and not to the point where it's harming someone else, but simply to be able to express that and to see the power and wisdom in that. So another thing that I need to say so I'm going to take care of my needs now by sharing with you a concept, just that it makes it easier for me to speak my truth. And I want to stand here in my power and speak my truth. So for me, this makes it easier. I'm putting on a new slide. And it says, it's a formula that says, my truth is not the truth. I heard that. And this is huge. So this is one of those little golden nuggets, I think, that you can use that could already shift maybe 50% of your communication and your collaborations and your work relationships, is this idea of my truth is not the truth. So the reason why it's important for me to say it is because I'm not here to convert you. I'm not here to convince you that my way is the right way. It's not the right way. It's a way. It's my way. And it has worked for me, and I'm sharing it with other people, and I've seen how it's helped other people. But it is not the way. And it's important for me to say that so that I can stand here fully in my power and express, because I can only, if I'm going to be here in my authenticity and really speak from my power, I have to speak from my experience, not someone else's experience. And my experience has a lot to do with some of the things I mentioned. I learned a lot from martial arts, which we'll be talking about, for a lot from Eastern philosophies, as well as Western religions and philosophies. And again, it's not my intention to convert you. It's simply I'm speaking from how I've learned it. So I hope that that's clear. And the wisdom in that is that I think oftentimes a lot of our problems come from this miscommunication, from this idea of I'm right, you're wrong. Does that resonate? Yeah. So what one of the talks that I've given that I love to discuss with activists, for instance, whether they are whatever kind of activists they are, is I call it how your need to be right is sabotaging your message. And that they may be right. You may be right. You might have a colleague and they're doing something that's you think is unprofessional or is not correct, and you may be right. But coming at them with, I'm right, you shouldn't be doing this, isn't going to change the situation. Unless you have the power to fire them, or reprimand them, or demote them. If you don't, then the question is, I might be right, but what do I need to do in my messaging to communicate successfully to them that there's an issue here that's triggering me or that's challenging me, and how do we resolve it? And that's really the essence of what the work is. And the example I always give is that here's a little clock that I have up here and I'm just going to put it here. And if I were to put it in the middle of the room and asked you all to describe this, who would be right? Everyone and no one. Because everyone would approach it from their perspective. And it's important for us to realize that, and if we were sitting in a circle, you would get more of an impact. I'd put it in the middle of the room, and what I always say is that, well, if there are 20 people sitting, let's say there's about 40 of us here, we would get 40 different stories about this. Which one's correct? And that's where we get stuck sometimes. And how I work with leaders is to help them see that the thing that comes closest, the truth that comes closest to this object would be all 40 stories combined. That would, and so think about your teams, think about who you're working with, that the most effective way to lead a team is to get everyone's perspective. And again, not so that that team member thinks like, I think this is the way it should be, and that you as a leader say, oh, let's do it, or you spend 2.5 hours in a meeting trying to find consensus. That's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is an effective leader is someone who can listen to other perspectives, because he or she does not have all the perspectives. And then with that information can make far more informed choices. So just be mindful of that in your communication, how much you're coming from a place of I'm right, you're wrong, and to give people the benefit of the doubt. That's huge in this work, Respectful Confrontation and Avoiding Conflict. Give people the benefit of the doubt, because even if you're right and you know you're right, if you give them the benefit of the doubt, you're going to give them space to step into the discussion more, and maybe something can change, and maybe there can be new solutions. Does that sound like that would be helpful? Yeah, thank you. So one of the this work really was inspired, first of all, from that question, why is it even though we know better, we still have arguments and fights? But I was very inspired by a woman named the Peace Pilgrim. Does anybody know the Peace Pilgrim? The Peace Pilgrim is a woman who, in the 1950s, American woman, who was fed up with war. And the way she dealt with that was to give up everything. She took a pencil and a toothbrush and started walking around the United States and said, I'm going to keep walking around the United States until there's no more war. And of course, she walked until her death in the 80s, when she was in her 80s. And if she didn't have a bed to sleep in, she didn't sleep in a bed. She slept somewhere else. And if no one fed her, she didn't eat. So she only ate if people fed her. She lived her life like that. And in those 30 years, she wrote the most amazing pieces on peace. And I'm going to turn on the slide now. That's a quote from the Peace Pilgrim that inspired me so much. That we will never end world war and strife until each one of us look at our own personal psychological violence and take steps to eliminate it. And again, and this is really big, I think, in the movement of conflict resolution and dispute resolution, is the problems can get so big if they've escalated, if they haven't been dealt with. and that we're so good at placing our attention on the problem is outside of us. Either it's a systemic thing, a structural thing, or it's the other person. And in this work of respectful confrontation, it already starts with this idea of looking at what's my role in it? How am I contributing to the miscommunication, to the disempowerment of others? And it's subtle. So this is a really powerful theme in the work that I do, in the sense of, if you're saying we will never end world war and strife until each one of us looks at our own personal psychological violence and takes steps to eliminate it. So it's not saying that we here, I don't know, maybe some of you have bombed villages. I don't know. But I'm going to make the assumption that the most of us here have not bombed villages. So that we're not doing large violent acts. But imagine if each one of us, the 7 billion of us on this planet, took responsibility for our own level of violence and aggression. How that could enormously shift and change things. And as I said, we're not talking about like major crime. We're talking about the simple things like gossip, clicks, not returning phone calls when you say you were going to, chronically being late. The list goes on. Does anybody feel courageous enough to confess or to say some of yours? Gossip, thank you. That's huge, yeah. Being dismissive, yeah. Any others?
Assuming ill intent on other people.
Assuming ill intent on others. Yeah, yeah. Not, and what we're going to look at is not speaking up when you see injustices happening, in a sense contributing to that. So there's a number of things that you know, we might think, well, no one noticed it, or no one got really harmed today. But after 10 years of that, I've actually worked with a company that went bankrupt because of the systemic gossip. That it caused so many problems, and it started seeping out to the customers that it really caused a lot of reputation problems that they had to close the company. It's insidious, gossip particularly. Oh, sarcasm, cynicism, that's a big one. And humor can be really, really violent on a certain level. So I ask you to just look at that, and that's really what this work is about, is starting with that premise. And this idea that I'm saying of shifting paradigms, of what if in all situations where there is miscommunication or there is confusion or there's conflict, before it really escalates, that I'm willing to take a look at my contribution in that. That could already shift a lot. So sometimes I'll give a talk. I want to focus more on this idea of conflict resolution and alternative ways of dispute resolution. But oftentimes I'm invited to speak and give talks called Power and Leadership in the 21st Century. And I just turn on the slide that says that title, Power and Leadership in the 21st Century. And I'm noticing trends around the world with small companies, with CEOs and top companies, that what is being asked of leaders at this time, what I call 21st century paradigm shift from the 20th century, is that leaders are being asked to come from more of a place of authenticity, more of a place of vulnerability and transparency. And that in essence, at first, many leaders, particularly like top CEOs, was like, this is crazy. You're saying that I'm going to come from my vulnerability, I'm going to come from my feelings and needs. And I'll say, well, yes, because of, I'm now going to the next slide, which is a quote that I think is brilliant and that I think is really, so for so many leaders are looking for ways to get the most out of their assets, whether that's their machines, that's their money that they have, or their employees. And this is a quote by Paul O'Neill, former Treasury Secretary of the United States under George W. Bush, that says, human beings have discretionary energy, and they would give it to you if you treat them with dignity and respect. And this is huge. if you are a manager, if you run a team, the more you're willing to show up and give of yourself without it being harmful and without it getting too weird, the more others will feel empowered to do that. And people might even want to come to work. People might want to put in that extra effort. Why? Because they know it's being appreciated. They know it's being seen. They know it's being valued. They know that if they contribute in that way, they're creating a culture in that team where others will do the same. And that is really an essence of this work, is this idea of I step into my power for the purpose of empowering others. So I'm actually gonna switch around again. Let's see, where am I gonna go with this? We'll get to that. So I would like to just demonstrate, get to that, like here. So in Respectful Confrontation, I break down the practice into 4 parts. It's based on martial arts. Because I discovered what we're going to talk about in this idea of vulnerability, we're going to talk about open-heartedness and how the power in this work and the power of success in how you are in the world and how you are a leader or how you're in your work is understanding and cultivating the power of open-heartedness. And that it's not just a hippies dancing in the field with flowers in their hair idea of love and compassion, which is really groovy if you're into that and do it. And that is a way of effectively shifting, of creating more harmony and balance with others. But in a more practical way, it's an electromagnetic field that you can activate that actually inspires people and empowers them and influences them in a beneficial, positive way and creates collaboration, which we're going to look at. But I wanted to show you, before we get there, how Respectful Confrontation is broken down into 4 parts. So I'm on the slide now that's with the title Respectful Confrontation, and then there's the 4 practices. And the first practice, the practice of developing the respectful self. The second practice, the practice of respectful engagement. The third practice, the practice of respectful offense. And the 4th practice, the practice of respectful defense. Is there someone here in the room that would like to demonstrate with me? Brave enough to come up on the stage and do a demonstration with me? Yeah, great.
Joe,
Yeah?
can we have 1 second to make an announcement for people on the phone?
Sure.
Apparently, it's not a mute-only line, so folks, can you please mute your phones? I'm getting lots of reports for background noises and feedbacks. Can you please put your phone on mute so the rest of the phone audience can hear the presenter? Thank you.
Thank you. Would you like to come up? Would you mind coming up here? I could come down there. Look, she's wearing hearts on her blouse. What's your name?
Carnett.
Carnett. I'm Joe.
Nice to meet you, Joe.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for coming up. Can we give her a little for doing it? She's showing courage and vulnerability, vulnerability and power. She's demonstrating that. So I just want to show how these 4 things play out and how we're relating to each other. So for those at home, I'm sorry, what was your name again?
Carnett.
Carnett.
Yes.
Carnett is standing here now, standing across from me, where there's about 4 or 5 feet between us. I'm going to make it about 4 feet. How did that feel?
A little weird.
You
but-
felt that, yeah. That's really important. I just stepped about a foot closer, and it had like reactions. You had, yeah.
Yeah.
So just to show how the subtlest things, a lot of this work is just understanding the subtlest things. If we're just going to rely on the words, that even just coming in about a foot with your body can already will influence that person in a way. And the question is, how is it going to benefit your collaboration, or is it going to make it more challenging and more difficult? So I would like to demonstrate. So again, oftentimes, a lot of the other trainings that I mentioned, like nonviolent communication, crucial conversations, they're focusing more on respectful offense and defense, which is more the words. You know, how do you speak truth? How do you deal with someone's reactivity? How do you defend yourself? And how do you dance with all that? the work I'm doing with the practice of developing the respectful self and respectful engagement, I believe is the key. If you can get that down, then most of your conversations will flow in the way you want them to flow. You may not get the result you want, but at least the conversation itself, you'll be heard, the other will be heard, and there'll be collaboration. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So in the metaphor of martial arts, what I discovered with martial arts is that I was very reactive. I told you a little bit about my childhood, and defensive. My emotions were either anger or shut down. That's really it. And very defensive. And I really felt like I couldn't take care of myself. And what I noticed in that period is that in this period of not being able to take care of myself, I was more aggressive and defensive. And I wouldn't allow people to get close to me. Then I started doing martial arts, and what I discovered was that at a certain point, because I felt like from within I could take care of myself, I was more open. I was less reactive. I was less defensive. I was more open to new possibilities, and I was more open to being in harmony with others. And that really triggered a lot for me, that the more I could take care of myself, if I felt that from within, the more peaceful I became. The more I learned how to fight, the more peaceful I became, and less defensive. So it's important to think, for those you know in your world who are very defensive, to think, well, they're probably most frightened. They need all of that defense around them because they feel like they can't take care of themselves. So that's also a way of looking at some of your work colleagues who are very defended, using the sarcasm and the humor to really think, maybe I can have more compassion for them because they're quite defended. And that it's a show of power to be able to stand in your vulnerability. So in the martial arts, I break my practice into 4, which is kind of like a martial arts match. It starts with respectful self, and that's one of the paradigm shifts of this work, is it starts with self. How present am I? How grounded am I? And in a martial arts match, the person always starts and is ready. They've done their practice. They've worked on, they know they've got the kicking and the punching. Have you ever done martial arts?
No.
Uh-oh, okay. They have studied, they understand respect and honor. That's why martial arts is great for young kids, is to teach them respect for a teacher, and most particularly for themselves. Imagine more children walking through the world with an internal true feeling of self-respect. That would instantly lower the crime rate and fighting and bullying. Let's take a breath for that. So it starts with self. I've done my work. I'm ready for this. I'm matched up against Carnett,
Yeah.
and I've heard that she's quite good, so I'm ready. And then there's always the next step, the practice of respectful engagement, where now what we're going to do is we're both going to take a step forward as if we're moving onto the mat. So for those at home, we've just taken a step closer. And in a sense, we're standing face to face. And it always starts with some kind of bow. So we're now bowing. Carnett and I are now bowing. And in that bow, we're communicating a lot. The first thing I'm doing is saying, I come from a place of personal power and respect, and I honor your personal power and respect. And I'm saying in this bow, it's my intention to whip your butt. And why? Not because I want to disempower you or destroy you, but if I choose to come with my full power, then I challenge you to call out your full power. And that's an important key in this work. If I show up to work fully in my power, not in a way that's threatening, but open-hearted, then I encourage others to do the same. If I challenge you to do your best, then if I do my best and challenge you to do your best, I'm calling out your best. And imagine having a work team where that was the work culture, where part of your intention for going to work was to help call out the power of others. I call this benevolent competition. Competition is essential. We need it for our growth, we need it for our development, we need it for success, for profit. But can we do it from a place where we empower one another? So it becomes a win-win. So respectful self, respectful engagement, there's a connection. And this is the essence of what I want to explore with you with the exercises, is that if you can get this down, that in every conversation you're having, you're present, and you know that there's a connection, then a lot of misunderstandings and miscommunication will be avoided. How many of you, if you don't mind standing here for a second, how many of you spend your time, imagine that these are my phones. I'm now holding the clock and the clicker. It's like, yeah, so we have an appointment at 4:45. Yeah, so that report, you're going to get that from me by 4:30 on Thursday. Yeah. So, right. And so, and it's Jen's birthday, so get her a cake or something like that. And how much of that information, does that seem familiar? So, and we wonder why we have miscommunication. So how can we find a way that even in our busy schedules, where we're really going at a big pace, that we can still be present, and it's a practice, and still make sure that in every conversation that there's a level of connection. So that's respectful self, respectful engagement. Then there's the practice of respectful offense. So here we are, we're respecting one another, we're engaging. And for conversation to happen, for collaboration to happen, someone has to have the courage to step out of their safe space and in a sense, out of balance into the space of another, to start the conversation, to speak truth. And in difficult conversation, and I use the metaphor, it's kind of like a fighting metaphor, offense, defense. It's not meant that way. But in our difficult conversations, we're often frightened to have those difficult conversations. It requires an enormous amount of courage and strength, right? So I get into respectful offense. I'm out of balance now, but I'm now engaging more. And you feel a difference now, yes? Mm-hmm. So, and what's important with respectful defense, and in a 2-day training, we spend a lot of time on respectful defense to know if you're going to walk through life open-hearted, you have to be able to take care of yourself. And so to be able to, if Carnette gets reactive in some way, how can I deal with that? I don't know how she's going to react. So, thank you. Thank you. I might need you again or someone else, but can we give you a favor? So that's really how I break down the practice. I'm going to go back now to this idea of what's this one? Done that. So now I'm looking at the slide that has a quote that I use with this idea that when one moves into their vulnerability, then their true power is revealed. When we're defended, we're not really in our true power. We're not expressing from our feelings and needs. We're not expressing from our talents and our gifts and our wisdom. When we can dare to open up in transparency and authenticity and vulnerability, take that risk in a way where we don't get harmed and others don't get harmed, we empower others, and our true power is revealed. And that's really the essence of this. And again, imagine teaching children this. To come from a place of vulnerability. This would overcome bullying instantly. Come from a place of vulnerability and for the purpose of empowering others. And you've seen it. You've seen it in your own life. You've seen it from other people. You see it in our world leaders. The level of vulnerability that it takes for a Martin Luther King Jr. to do what he did, or Mahatma Gandhi. And the list goes on. Who are your heroes? Any one of your heroes, whether they're sports heroes or whether athletes or political figures or social figures, somehow managed to develop a way of feeling at home in the uncomfortable, in the vulnerable, and still feel like they're connected to their power. To keep going, to persevere, and get their message across. So here is a picture, a diagram of the electromagnetic field of the heart. So for those at home, the slide says the electromagnetic field of the heart. And what the picture is showing is that it's a person and you see their heart, you see their brain, and you see like these, what would you call that, grids of energy coming out of their heart. And do any of you know the Heart Math Institute? Cindy, you can come up and talk with me. The Heart Math Institute is an institute in Northern California that has been studying the electromagnetic field of the heart for about 4 decades. And what they've come up with in their research, their scientific research, is that the electromagnetic field of the heart is 5,000 times stronger than that of the brain. And that the electromagnetic field of the heart can actually permeate through flesh and bone, maybe walls. This is what they've proven scientifically. So that gets me thinking, and a lot of other people thinking, is wouldn't it be something interesting to cultivate, to be able to connect and resonate from an electromagnetic field from the heart? This idea of open-heartedness. So that you can, and you can see, and the 90s in the Netherlands, in the corporate training world, it was really big, charisma was really big. Millions of dollars were spent for top leadership trainings, and the idea of charisma. Learn charisma. Are you born with it? Can you learn it? As a way of training leaders to be more effective. Millions they spent. And my belief is that basically what they're doing is that they were able to cultivate, if you have charisma, if you can really influence people in a way, it's really, you're activating a sense of open-heartedness. So this work is really, in the exercises, is understanding what would that be like to walk to work, be with your family in an open-hearted way, as a way of influencing others in an open-hearted way. Now, people often say at this point, Joe, are you saying that I'm going to walk around with my heart open all the time? Are you mad? Would any of you thinking that? Yeah. So I would say no. Some of the work that we're doing is we're trying to reshift some of our paradigms. And one paradigm is this, oftentimes where we get limited in who we are has to do with that we see things in polarity. It's either this or that, good or bad, right or wrong. And if I do something, I have to do it fully, and I might lose myself, and I don't want to lose myself, so I'm just not going to engage. And the same thing with open-heartedness. If my heart's open, it's got to be totally open, and I don't want to go to work with my heart totally open, so I'm not going to have my heart open. So what I'm saying is that's like having an on-off switch on your heart. It's either on or off. Well, what if we all upgraded to a dimmer switch? And that we had more option in that we actually could have a more sophisticated way of addressing our hearts, in the sense of saying, I can have my heart open, and if it feels safe, then I can have it open like 80%. If it starts getting heavy, the conversation, I can dim it down to about 50%. And if that person is bullying me and getting reactive, I can still practice, if it feels right, if it still feels safe, to dim down my heart to about 3%, to take care of myself. And the wisdom in that is that even if your heart is open 3%, it's still open. So in difficult conversations, in conflicts, in disputes, if you can just practice that you can give that person some level of respect and understanding, seeking common ground. Even if your heart's only open 3%, there's still an opening. There's still possibility. I've talked to judges who work in divorce court about this. And with couples counseling, I've done the couples work I've done, just a little bit to see that there's some sense of possibility. So let's take a breath. Let's see what we got here. Oh yeah, so before we get to that, did the 4 practices. So now we're going to actually do a little practice. And we're going to explore a little bit so that you can feel. So going with this idea that the key to the success in your communication starts with how present are you, and how aware and mindful are you of what's going on at any given moment. Yeah, so I want to show this slide. This is a slide that says, you may know me, but you have no idea who I am. And this, in a sense, and the picture here is of an iceberg. And as we know, with icebergs, 10% is above the water surface, 90% below. And that for captains of ships, it's not the 10% they have to worry about, it's the 90%. And in many communication models that I've done around the world, studied around the world, there's the iceberg model. How many of you know the iceberg model of communication? So it goes with this theory that 10% of our communication is verbal. 90% is nonverbal. And in essence, many of us think, why do we get into arguments? Why do we have miscommunication? I communicated clearly. We both speak the same language. We both have a relatively good IQ, Why did it get misunderstood? Well, it's very rare that it's because of the 10%. And that what we're going to explore now is, why is it even though we know better, we still have arguments and fights? It's most oftentimes the 90%. So we're going to do an exploration of the 90%. That's not on the surface. And then we'll look at what it is. And the reason why we're going to do this exercise is because if we're going to like put on our scuba diving outfit and actually go under the nonverbal and go under who we are, our feelings, our needs, and all the things that aren't on the surface, this is how most of us walk through life. It's a picture of a stormy sea with a small boat bouncing around on it. In mindfulness trainings, that's the big thing right now, mindfulness. This is our inner experience, this turmoil. And that's what we bring to work. Excuse me. And what we're going to explore through mindfulness trainings and through this work and the exercise we're going to do now is to make that stormy sea into a very calm sea. When the sea is calm, it's easier to see what's underneath. Okay, so are you ready to do this exercise? So, excuse me. Could you put on the music? Yeah, Mohammed knew which music I wanted. Daniel May? Yeah, really not too loud, but low. So, I'm going to talk you through an exercise that's called the core. I call it the core exercise. And for me, this is the core of the practice that I do. It's the light beam. I say it's kind of like the light beam that can cut through the confusion of our conversations and our relationships. It clarifies, and where this is like the light beam, and if you take a light beam and put it through a prism, on the other side of the prism is all the refracted colors. That's like the rest of the practice. Which if we had much more time, we would go into all the other practices. But this is one exercise that you can do on a daily basis. And with any practice, if you do it regularly, you'll see that you don't have to do it mindfully. You don't have to think about it anymore, you just do it. It's just a new habit where you can be more present, more grounded. You can feel more flow and harmony in your body without having to think about it, which will promote good health. You'll feel more rested. You'll have more energy. How you interact with others will be more organic and flowing. And you'll be more productive at work. Okay. So what I'm going to do now, for those at home, you can do this as well. I'd like you to put your papers down. And we're going to sit in a way where the spine is as straight as possible. And one thing I always say with this, and I think it's good to just share now. Can you lower that, please, a little bit? Is in any of these exercises we're doing, in any of this talk, it's important that you feel safe. And this is also important in a way to how to be with difficult conversations, is to be able to go within and be able to feel, am I feeling safe or not? If you're not feeling safe here, please tell me. Please let's talk, see what's going on. And just as important as that you feel safe, it's just as important that you do feel uncomfortable. Many of you just went. And why is that? Because it's in the uncomfortable that we grow. It's in the uncomfortable that we learn. We don't learn or grow if we're numbed out, if we're in a rut. It's when we put ourselves in new situations, take risks, the vulnerability, that in difficult conversations, where we can deepen relationship, where we can deepen the collaboration, that's uncomfortable. It's alive and vital. It's scary sometimes, but it's uncomfortable. And the more we can delineate those two things, the easier it is to walk through the world knowing I feel safe and I feel uncomfortable. Great. Keep going. So looking at our own level of resistance, whether it's mental, like judging this, like this is silly, or internal fear coming up, or insecurity, to just notice all of that, because that's really what this is about, is to be able to start noticing those signals as important information in how we're communicating, to avoid conflict, to identify what's going on, our internal experiences. So if you're not feeling uncomfortable, I always say, I'm really good at making people feel uncomfortable. So if you would like to feel more uncomfortable, let me know. I can do that. And again, as I was saying, if you think about your top heroes, people you admire, somehow they managed to figure out a way to feel skillful and courageous in being uncomfortable, to do what they were doing in the uncomfortable, and not let it throw them off and run away. So, so sitting in the chair, feet flat on the floor, hands resting on your lap. And if it feels safe, closing your eyes so that you go within. So you're sitting on the chair. You want to keep your spine straight. Closing your eyes. Take a moment to just feel your connection with gravity. And I invite you, as you keep your eyes closed, to bring your awareness to a place below your navel, about the width of 3 fingers below your navel. So one way to measure that is to put your fingers together, put your index finger over your navel where your pinky resides. That's about the width of 3 fingers below your navel. And from that point, go 1/3 of the way inside of the body, from the front of the body. So keeping your focus, your full attention on the spot, about 1/3 of the width of 3 fingers below your belly button, 1/3 of the way into the body. And I call this your center. The Japanese would call it your hara. Chinese, the dantian. Into a place of where you have impulse, creativity. And I call it, this is your center of personal power, where your personal power resides. Focusing on this spot helps you to ground, become more present and centered. Essential in any difficult conversation. From your center, become aware of your physical body. Just notice what's going on in your body at the moment. You don't have to change anything. It doesn't have to be good or bad. Simply notice. Are you tired? Are you hungry? Is there tension? How's your breath? From your center, check in with your emotional body. What emotions are you present to at this moment? There are probably hundreds of emotions flowing through you right now. Which ones are more on the surface, more present? And from your center, become aware of your mental body, your thoughts. How are your thoughts right now? Are they tight and judgmental? Spacious and generous? Is doing this exercise bringing up resistance? Feelings? Judgments? From your center, and now also becoming aware of your heart, or the middle of your chest, or your heart center, where understanding and respect resides, love and compassion, the desire to connect resides. From your place of personal power in the lower belly and your heart, ask yourself the question, how connected do you feel at this moment to something larger than yourself? For whatever that means for you. And notice how that feels. Becoming aware of more of a connection with yourself and how you might be influencing yourself at this moment. Physically, emotionally, mentally. And staying connected to your center and your heart, keeping your eyes closed. From your center, become aware of the space we're in, the surroundings, the room you're in. Placing yourself in a context and noticing different dynamics of the space, not with your eyes, but the smells, sounds, energy. Does it feel safe or unsafe? Is it frenetic or calm? Placing yourself in a context, in this place, at this time. And noticing how the space is influencing you at this moment. How you're influencing yourself and how the space is influencing you at this moment. And with more of an awareness of a connection to yourself and your surroundings, from your center and from your heart, keeping your eyes closed, open up to an awareness of all those others in the room here and all those others on the phone. Try to do that with your eyes closed, just to see what that feels like. Can you open to an awareness? Can you actually experience a connection with the dozens of other people in this room and perhaps more people on the phone at this moment? And how does that feel? Is that triggering some thoughts, some judgments, some feelings, emotions? Is it activating some energy? Very slowly, without changing anything, staying connected to connection with yourself, with the room, and with others. Without changing anything, without censoring anything, see if it's possible from this open place to slowly open your eyes. If you're on the phone and you're alone, then just look around and check your surroundings. If you're here in the room or if you're around other people on the phone, seek out eye contact from others. And I invite you to really not just scan the room, but if you make eye contact, to actually hold the eye contact for a moment. And just notice, be courageous. And in the stillness, just make that eye contact and notice. Opening your eyes. So see, and the purpose of this is to see how much you're actually communicating with each other without words. So really turning around, without hurting your neck, turning around and looking around the room. And what would it be like to actually have the courage to stay with one person, holding eye contact? And the question to ask in this idea of empowering one another is, how courageous do I feel to actually have an impact on another in a positive way? And more importantly, how courageous do I feel at this moment to allow myself to be impacted by another? Okay, so shake it a little bit. Can you lower the music, turn it off, please? So, before I go on with some more of the lecture, does anybody want to share what your experience was? If you discovered anything, if you learned anything from that?
I should say, I really felt just that one with my body. I could kind of feel like energy current going through my thighs. You know, you really were able to focus on your senses. So it does put you at a place where you feel really confident and just empowered to be able to take that next step, or
Okay.
move the road.
What's your name?
Leslie Nelson.
Leslie, thank you. So Leslie said that it helped her feel more empowered. She felt more secure and confident, is what I heard, to actually want to take on the world. Because she was connected with her center and felt, in a good way, felt energy moving through her body. Great.
When you showed the map of the heart on the screen, when we did that practice, and you were explaining how the heart under our navel finds its roots in some Eastern sciences,
Mm-hmm.
the heart part reminded me a lot of one of my favorite verses, Proverbs 4:23, which
Mm-hmm.
says, "Guard your heart, because out of it flows the course of your life."
Would you mind saying that into the microphone, because because I love what you're saying, and I want everyone to hear it, because I really appreciate your And if you would mind saying your name. It sounds like it's on.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi.
Thank you.
My name's Kathleen O'Quinn.
Kathleen.
And I was just saying that it was really powerful to see the math and science behind heart and energy and focusing on that, because it reminds me of a proverb, Proverbs 4:23, which says, "Guard your heart, because out of it flows the course of your life."
Mm.
And I'm sure, as with all proverbs, it can take eternity to really understand what it means. But something that I've taken away from that is, whatever I'm allowing to feel or go into my heart, or whatever I'm doing with that energy, ultimately it does have some physical impact and circumstances.
Yes.
And so this was the science behind something that I suspected to be true.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. I love when people bring in quotes from places of wisdom. And that's really it. The purpose of this is to experience what it is, how powerful you already are. when you can really get present and grounded, and if you really are aware of all of these internal experiences, and you're connected with your surroundings, and you can always check in really quickly, this feels safe, this feels right, and when you can connect with others and the same thing, you're unstoppable. And you have so much resources at your disposal if you knew how to tap into them. And that's key. And you realize how much of an impact you can have without having to do very much. So for leadership, that's important. For raising children, for relationship, for working with your colleagues, that your level of presence is already having an impact. And whether you know it or not, you're having an impact. For instance, the example I always give, so I'll do it and then I'll explain what I'm doing. So, I've worked with some colleagues where, I'm picking up my coat and I've got my bag, and it's like I'm coming to work and everyone's there, and or that person comes in, all right, let's get the meeting going. So what I did was I just threw my bag, threw my coat, I've got a grimace on my face, got an attitude, and do you think that's not going to have an impact on everyone else? And then I'm going to start wondering, if I'm not mindful, why are they being so reactive to me? So it's important for us to realize how much we are actually impacting each other. And I say that as a way of empowering you. You're already far more powerful than you think you are. Truly. In these subtle realms, you are far more powerful than you think you are, and can have far more of an impact. You can choose what impact you'd like to have in your work environment based on just how you are, who you are, how you show up. And how many of you know my favorite quote from Spider-Man 1 and 2? Huh? Anybody? Thank you. With great power comes great responsibility. So please use your power well. Why is it, even though we have arguments and fights and disagreements and confusion and misunderstanding, it's this aspect. We're not realizing how we're influencing each other, that's triggering other people, getting them reactive, and we're wondering, what's wrong with them? So please be mindful of how you are, of what impact you're having. And I'm going to move on to this in the slides to I'm on the iceberg chart, and you see 10% and 90%. When you just present yourself and you have a meeting and you're just coming from the 10%, you're not really effectively engaging and interacting and communicating with the full person, nor with yourself. And what I appreciated about the comments that were made, Leslie and this other woman who just left, to me, that one of the great things that I admire is generosity. And there's the generosity of, oh, Joe, would you like a glass of water, or let's go get a cup of coffee. But what I call great generosity is the generosity of being willing to give of yourself. That's the vulnerability part. That's the powerful part. So it's Leslie, right? Yeah.
Oh, Kathleen.
Kathleen. Oh, she was Leslie, I think. Sorry, Kathleen. So Kathleen practiced great generosity. She got up in a room full of strangers and shared something very deep to her in her heart. So I appreciate that. To me, that's heroic. And this idea of, in your work situations, how much are you showing up? And how mindful are you of what's showing up? So the teaching here is, if you're just approaching people from the verbal, from the intellectual, from ideas and judgments and opinions, that's only 10% of the experience. And it's not until we start understanding more of what's at play in all of our communication interactions that we begin to become more skillful and avoid conflicts. So if you look at this chart here, you see that more closest to the surface are things like body language, facial expression, all of the more external surface things that get in the way, that influences our communication. Does that make sense? Does it? Yeah. Then we get into we're getting deeper. We're putting on the scuba diving outfit, and we're getting a little bit deeper here. And we've got relationship, power dynamics. So let's say there's a situation where one person says, I would like a cup of tea. Now, what's a logical response to that? What type of tea? Oh, I'd like to hang out with you. What other responses? I'm sorry? Teaism's around the corner. Go help yourself. What else is a logical response? Go get it. That's logical. Or, I'd like one too. Those are logical responses to, I'd like a cup of tea. Well, what happens if one person says, I'd like a cup of tea, and the other person says, how dare you, and storms out? Is that a logical response? Do you recognize that in your life? That happens in your life. Is it a logical response? No. So again, often most people will say, which causes conflict, is, well, that's just the way they are. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm not going to deal with it. But as a respectful confronter, it's our job to say, this must have come from somewhere. Whose fault it is doesn't matter yet, but I am going to acknowledge it now, because if I don't acknowledge it now, it's going to escalate. And maybe 10 years from now, we're going to be in a mediation discussion or a divorce. So, I like a cup of tea. How dare you? It's my obligation to figure out where that come from. So I start with the 10%. Was it in the wording? No, my words were clear. That's not disputed. So if it's not in the words, it's got to be in the 90%. And the practice, the skill, the technology of respectful confrontation is learning how to look into the 90% to find out what caused it, so that you can zero in on it and then address it. Talk to that person. It's going to be an uncomfortable conversation, but if you can address it and do it in a respectful way, it's done. And it won't lead to conflict. And so, for instance, what if, bless you. So how a power dynamic, for instance, or power status, if the receptionist of IBM says, I'd like a cup of tea, to another receptionist, is different from if the receptionist of IBM says to the CEO of IBM, I'd like a cup of tea. Now, I'm not saying it's good or bad, it's not a question of, but it just changes the interaction, which is going to influence it. So for you to be more mindful of how anything you're speaking is influenced based on their 90% or your 90%. So then as you see, we go deeper, we've got emotions, personal philosophies, beliefs, judgments, prejudices, culture, race, gender, customs, love, education, religion. And then really deep down, you've got fears and wounds and needs and desires, trauma, longing and insecurities. Now, many people might say, well, this is a work environment. I'm not going to be dealing with desires and longing, and I'm not going to bring in my wounds. Well, you don't have to bring them in, you don't have to speak it necessarily, but they are influencing you at this very moment. 5 more minutes? Okay. So, so to be mindful that, and what I will do is if there is a disruption in the relationship and there's some tension, is I will first check, was it in the words? No, it wasn't in the words. So then it had to be my 90% or their 90%. And in practicing generosity, I'll say, could it have been in my 90% that caused that? And if I can't find it, I'll go to them and find out what happened. And a way to resolve that is simply to say, so Cindy, would you mind playing with me for a second? Just so you can. So I noticed we were in the other room, and I said, I'd like a cup of tea, and you said, how dare you? Is that what happened?
Yes.
Okay, so I don't know what happened.
Well, it seemed really impertinent of you.
It did.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry if it triggered that feeling in you. That wasn't my intention. I was just thinking out loud. You know that I talk out loud. And it really wasn't even directed towards you. I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. So I'm sorry that I triggered that in you, and I'll be more mindful in the future not to speak my thoughts so much. And if I really address you, I will say something to you.
Okay.
Yeah, is that helpful?
Yeah.
And I have a request that if there is something that I'm doing that does trigger you or annoys you, that you maybe find a way to say it to me so that we can resolve it.
Okay. I can commit to that.
Okay. All right, thank you. So we just played a little game. That's really the essence of respectful confrontation, is to, as things emerge, to go through that uncomfortable thing, get it out of the way so it's not going to linger, so the resentment doesn't build. And what you get in this is that, this is a simple situation, but the more heavy the situation is, or more challenging, if you can go through that and really express feelings and needs, then what you come up with is learning more about each other's values, beliefs, strengths, and that will deepen relationship, and that will deepen the collaboration. So I want to go through a couple of more slides, just so in this, just a couple of things, theory, and then we're going to sum up. So I'm now on the slide with true power equals brute force. So the paradigms that we're shifting here is these unexamined assumptions, how the reason why why we know better, we still have arguments and fights, and we don't stand fully in our power. We don't have the impact we want to have. We're not satisfied or fulfilled. Is because many of us think that these are the same. True power is the same as brute force. Confrontation is the same as conflict. Assertiveness is the same as aggression. And because we think they're the same, if we think that being in our power means someone's going to get harmed or bullied, then we're not going to step into our power. If we think that confronting, which is to speak truth, is going to cause a conflict, then we're not going to speak our truth. And if we think that asserting ourselves, asserting our truth, our needs, is going to lead to aggression or be perceived as aggression, we're not going to do it. Does that make sense? So what I'm trying to do is to delineate them, separate them, so that we can see how they are different, so that we would feel more empowered to be in our true power, to come from a place of confrontation, of open-hearted engagement and speaking truth, to assert our truth and our needs. Now on the slide, I'm going to skip that. So what I'm saying is brute force is not the same as true power, and that in essence, I've come up with a new system to redefine power, which I call the 4 pillars of true power, where it's not just about brute force. And I learned this I thought about this in terms of from my martial arts teachers, some of them, and the masters of my teachers. These like little 80-year-old people who they'll stand there, and I've seen films of this in live, where these large men would come running at them, and they would just manage to just take their energy and throw them across the room. And they're just like, bring it on. And what is that? So what I came up with were these 4 qualities: grounding, focus, strength, and flexibility. That with an equal mastery of all 4, you're truly in your power, and you can deal with any difficult conversation, any difficult situation when you're grounded, focused on the task, and you're using the proper amount of strength and flexibility. And the strength, comes back to the 4 practices. The grounding is respectful self. The focus is respectful engagement, the communication part. I believe if you've got that down, then the rest is really easy. And the strength and flexibility is finding the dance between how assertive do you need to be and how much do you need to be flexible to really be in the dance with the person you're communicating with, particularly in a difficult conversation. How conflict is different from confrontation. Conflict is easy. You know, it's like, you're different from me, stay there. If you come too close, I'll throw you in jail, or I'll gossip. And confrontation is different. It's an open-hearted experience. It's coming from a place of vulnerability, to seek out truth. Truth is uncomfortable because it leads to change. And as I said, we're built in a way where we avoid change because it's uncomfortable. Our whole nervous system is set up that way. Right? This idea of, to be able to stand in an open-hearted way, because usually when we're reactive, we usually get into fight. So I'm now like pushing up against someone, and we actually go through life like this, push, push, push. Come on, push harder, you just work harder. And we wonder why we're burning out. Or if there's a difficult situation, we flight, we walk away and just, I'll deal with that tomorrow, I'm gonna make a phone call. Or we freeze, and it's like we just stand there, and it's like, yeah, sure, I was gonna take my kids away for the weekend, but I'll do that report if you want me to. So, and that causes miscommunication, breakdown of relationship, people not feeling empowered. Fight, flight, or freeze. So to be able to stand in your true power, to be grounded, focused, and the proper amount of strength and flexibility is what we're seeking, so that you can be open-hearted and have those difficult conversations from a place of respect. And in terms of the theory of this, if you look in Webster's dictionary, you can see that even in conflict and confrontation are different. That here you see strike, competitive, opposing, antagonistic. Whereas with conflict, confront, it's to face, especially in challenge, to bring face to face. I say confrontation with front open. That's all confrontation is standing face to, having the courage to stand face to face, to speak your truth and to hear the truth of another, to speak your needs and to hear the needs of another. That's essential to make this work. And in that, that's how the new solutions will emerge. So my definition is a conflict is any encounter that leads to the further separation of individuals, the breakdown of relationship, and the disempowerment of others. And a confrontation, I'm going through the slides, so it's all there on the slides, the definitions. An encounter that leads to the individuals coming together, deepening of relationship, and the empowerment of all involved. That to me is how I can speak truth and have difficult conversations. If my intention and my motivation is to deepen relationship, bring individuals closer together, and to empower everyone involved. Now imagine being a lead, the manager of your team, or being part of a team with that intention. So the power in this is to realize that sometimes being nice isn't necessarily the best choice. That nice can actually be conflict. I'm going back to the slide that shows, because sometimes being nice disempowers others. When you should say yes, and you say no, when you let something go and you don't say anything, and you just smile and say, well, that's just the way it is. So for those of us who live our lives being nice and holding on to that idea, realize that how violent that can be. That actually what we're trying to do is really, sometimes nice is effective, but sometimes what we're looking for is great compassion, where it's our obligation to have those difficult conversations, to empower others. So, quote that I use is, if you fear making anyone mad, then you ultimately probe for the lowest common denominator of human achievement, former President Jimmy Carter. It's our obligation in terms of deepening the relationship to have those difficult conversations as a way of deepening collaboration and avoiding conflict. So I'm going to wrap this up. I'm going to leave this for now. Courage is what it takes to stand up and speak. Courage is what it takes to sit down and listen. And end with this. With the realization of His Holiness the Dalai Lama's quote, with the realization of one's potential and the self-confidence in one's ability, one can build a better world. And I just want to end with this idea that for you to consider, not only in terms of avoiding or conflict resolution and avoiding conflict, but actually in this idea of shifting your work culture. You spend many, many hours at work. Most of your day, most of your life is spent. Wouldn't it be beneficial if your work time was a place where you actually felt that you can be empowered? You can find that it's actually a creative experience, that there's collaboration, where you can actually feel valued and seen and honored and respected. And that happens simply by you beginning to change that culture from this place of respect and understanding, and to say, I can shift the work culture if I start addressing the issues that need to be addressed now in a respectful way. And there are some very simple things you can do. Appreciations are a very powerful confrontation, to appreciate your work colleagues. I appreciate the fact that you're so punctual. It's powerful. It seems silly. It seems a little Hallmark cardy in a way, but it works. I've consulted a team, and it shifted the, I asked them to make a commitment every day to at least appreciate one person on their team, or to appreciate at least once that day everyone on their team. And people started feeling more collaborative. So a couple of other things, just in terms of that. Be aware of reactive behavior, your own and others, and name it and call it out in a respectful way before it escalates. Seek connection. If you feel like there isn't connection, or if someone's caught up in their own cynicism or something, find a respectful way to engage with them. Don't forget this idea of truth. Your truth is not the truth. It's a way of being open to more possibilities. Seek common ground. And maybe make a commitment to say, from now on, when I come to work, I'm going to really put a little energy into empowering others around me. See how that can shift in a slow way. And we all know that it may not change it by tomorrow, but if everyone's doing these small things, just in the same way that the Peace Pilgrim said, that we're not going to change world war and all of that if we don't first deal with our own personal psychological violence. Then you can switch it around from a place of empowerment and positive impact. That the larger picture can change if I take responsibility for my part in being more respectful, more compassionate, being more mindful of my own behavior and calling out others' behavior in a respectful way. So thank you. Thank you for listening at home and here. Hope this was beneficial in some way.
So thank you, Joe Weston, for teaching us respectful confrontation, and we'll use that in our ADR practice to help people choose their impact and shift the workplace culture. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, if
And
you
if
have any
people-
questions, please come up and ask. I've got some books if you're interested in buying some of my books. Please come on up. Oh, one second. And here's a website address for my website.
Thank you very much. That was excellent.
Was it?
Excellent. Clearly a 2-day workshop.
Yeah,